Welcome back to the channel, guys. Your fellow Gen Z Brit back again with another generational type video today. This is why Gen X is the real loser generation. Now that's a very interesting title to say the least. In this video, I haven't seen it, for it's gonna be a blind reaction coming from The Economist. Description says millennials and Gen Z or Gen Z get a lot of media attention, but spare thought for Gen X, who have actually had it pretty rough, as our senior economics writer Callum Williams explains. Okay, this is gonna be really interesting because especially when you guys know I've done quite a few of these videos, and quite a common trope that gets thrown around, especially with Gen X, is how they're like the forgotten generation, right? Everybody forgets about Gen X. So is this gonna be one of those videos that talk about the things that maybe we forgot about? And you know what's funny as well, because I know a lot of you Gen Xers probably like don't care at the same time. Like you guys also, I don't care, and you guys told some of you guys be telling me like, we don't care, like just like leave us alone. We just want to be left alone. You do your thing, we do our thing, and I'm just like, you guys know me, I'm a curious guy, and I'm not gonna listen. My parents are Gen X. I'm curious. I'm diving into the world of Gen X right here, especially. Very interesting generation. But yeah, guys. Enough jibber jabber. Look, road to 60k, as you can see my subscriber count at the top here. So if you haven't already subscribed, join me on the journey of curiosity. Follow me along. You're not going to want to miss this roller coaster of a ride. So much things coming your way as well. And don't forget to like the video, especially, so I know you guys want to see more. But guys, with that being said, let's get straight into the video. Let's go.
What is Generation X?
Generation X describes people who are born between roughly 1965 and 1980. Every generation seems to think that they are the cursed generation. So, for example, Gen Z will say, our childhood has been ruined by social media and smartphones. Millennials will say, we can't buy a house. Baby boomers will say...
I don't think us Gen Z are the same. We can't. Like, our child has been ruined by social media. Like, I don't think we're that self-aware or hyper-aware of, like, how technology has changed us. I think we're too consumer mindset right now. Only if you're going back in time, which I think most Gen Zers aren't doing, you'll notice stuff like that. Anyways, I'm just nitpicking. He's generalizing here, and I could be wrong.
Example, Gen Z will say, our childhood has been ruined by social media and smartphones. Millennials will say, we can't buy a house. Baby boomers will say,
right,
our retirement is very uncertain. But what I've kind of discovered is that really the true losers in the generational war are Generation X.
So tell me what it is that makes Generation X really so unusual.
So one thing that's unusual about Generation X is that no one is really that interested in them. So if you look, for example, at the number of books that have been written about Generation X, or even things like the number of times that people search for Generation X online compared with, say, searching for baby boomers, they're just much less popular, basically. They're also much less likely than any other generation to know that they are themselves part of Generation X. And so there's this weird thing where they've kind of vanished from public consciousness.
So why should we be thinking about them?
Gen X are...
See, and this is what I said at the beginning of the video. A big kind of like stereotype with Gen X is like the forgotten generation. And he's basically saying that now. To what extent do you guys agree with that? My Gen Xers, if you're watching this, do you agree? Do you agree? Oh, maybe you don't care. And maybe that's the point. Maybe because you don't care, that's the point. Because nobody's caring about you.
Vanished from public consciousness.
I care about Gen X.
So why should we be thinking about them?
Gen X are at a tricky age at the moment. There's this theory called the U-bend of life theory, which actually has quite a lot of academic support. And basically what this says is that you're pretty happy when you're young and you're pretty happy when you're old, but you're pretty miserable when you're in middle age. So there was a recent poll by Ipsos which found that roughly a third of Gen Xers are either not very happy or not happy at all. Now the question is, why does this happen? There's a few reasons. One is that some chronic health issues begin to emerge in middle age. People kind of come to realize that they're not going to achieve all they wanted to achieve in their career. And also they're at this tricky stage where often they have to look after both children and parents. So it's not surprising that people find those years to be particularly difficult.
So those are the age-dependent things, but you're also talking about a slightly different cohort effect, right?
Right, because isn't that something that just happens to for every generation? Like Gen X, you go through that. Like, how is that related to Gen X? I think he's gonna explain.
That people find those years to be particularly difficult.
Because
that's the age thing, no?
Age-dependent.
That's like midlife crisis, what it sounds like.
You're talking about a slightly different cohort effect, right?
Yeah, so there's age effects, which is kind of like where Gen X are right now, and then there's cohort effects, which is like Gen X, the people who are in Gen X are themselves kind of cursed in some way. And that's the kind of second plank of the argument, which is that, yes, Gen X are uniquely challenged.
Okay.
So one way of looking at this is by looking at their incomes. Now, one historical pattern that has endured for a long time is that the current generation earns more than the previous generation. That was true of the baby boomers. That's also true of Generation Z or Gen Z and of the millennials.
Yeah. But then the money goes not as far though each generation. Like we technically earn more. Like the younger, like if Gen Z technically earn more, but cost of living crisis, everything else rises up with that, right? Anyway, why am I interrupting? Let me speak. Sorry.
Generation Z, Gen X are uniquely challenged. So one way of looking at this is by looking at their incomes. Now, one historical pattern that has endured for a long time is that the current generation earns more than the previous generation. That was true of the baby boomers. That's also true of Generation Z or Gen Z and of the millennials. The Gen X have done better than the previous generation, the boomers, but by the smallest amount of any generation. So in that sense, their income growth has been pretty weak. Now, the question is, why is that? One factor is to do with kind of cultural preferences. There's this idea that goes around that, certainly in comparison to the baby boomers, Generation X are less kind of keen on being corporate drones. And so that might mean that they just put less effort in at work. But the other thing that's going on is that if you look at when people's earnings start to really take off, it's in their kind of 30s and early 40s. Now, for Generation X, this coincided with the aftermath of the financial crisis of 2008, where wage growth across the world was very, very weak. So they were hit at just the moment when they were really going to sort of take off in their earnings.
Callum, this all sounds a bit bogus to me. I mean, it's a 25-year cohort, millions and millions of people. Is there really such a thing as Generation X or any other generation?
The way I think about it is that there is a lot of fluff that is written about the generations. People love to read about the generations for some reason, and there's a lot of nonsense that goes along.
There is a lot of nonsense.
But I think there's actually a lot of pretty robust historical and economic and sociological evidence that people of a certain cohort really do think about the world in different ways.
Right.
So the kind of classic example would be, if you look at people who grew up during Weimar Germany, they became much, much more averse to inflation than other Germans of different ages. Or if you look at Americans who are, accumulating wealth during the Great Depression, those people continued to be very skeptical of the stock market. So I think you have to be careful about how you use this generational analysis, but I think it would be wrong to throw it out entirely.
But haven't Generation X done pretty well in terms of wealth accumulation and tending to own their own homes?
Well, that's what I thought, but when I looked into the data, I discovered that wasn't the case. So there's often two big kind of components of someone's net wealth. One is to do with like savings, so often savings that are in retirement accounts that are in the stock market, and the other is to do with if they own a home or not. So on the stock market, again, Generation X kind of had a tough time in the sense that the period during which they would be expected to accumulate most stock market wealth was a decade in which stock markets did really badly. That was the 2000s. They did particularly badly in the US, actually, where the US market really underperformed the global market. But global stock markets as a whole did pretty badly, partly because of the dot-com crash and partly because of the financial crisis crash. So they actually weren't really able to accumulate as much wealth as either previous or following generations. And the other thing about home ownership was also surprising to me. If you look at the older millennials, they're actually more likely to own a home than Generation X were of the same age. And again, the long shadow of the financial crisis is to blame here, because what you had in 2008 to 2011 was a large number of foreclosures and so on, particularly in the US. And the people who got hit hardest by that were Generation X. So as a result, they've not been able to get on the housing ladder to anywhere near the same degree as the baby boomers.
So
did he misspeak? Because I agreed with the last part where he talks about like baby boomers definitely had it the easiest to get on the housing market, but Gen X millennials have it easier than Gen X. I don't know did he say that? Unless if that's generally what he said, then that's mad. That's the first time I've heard that. I don't know if I would agree with that, but I think millennials definitely probably have it harder than Gen X to get on the house market in general. But I don't know. What do you guys think, man? You guys let me know. What do you guys think? My millennials watching, my Gen Xers watching, boomers watching. Gen Zers watching, you guys let me know.
Again, the long shadow of the financial crisis is
Comment
is
down
to blame
below
here, because what you had in 2008 to 2011 was a large number of foreclosures and so on, particularly in the US. And the people who got hit hardest by that were Generation X. So as a result, they've not been able to get on the housing ladder to anywhere near the same degree as the baby boomers.
So is there any hope on the horizon for Generation X? When are they going to come out of the U-bend of life into the happier decades?
So the U-bend will be left behind in 10 to 15 years, and then it will be the millennials' turn to become unhappy. So in that sense, that's optimistic. The future, though, for Generation X might not be that rosy either, for two reasons. One is that a lot of them are going to retire just at the point when pension systems really hit a crunch. So, for example, in the US, 2033 is seen by many people as the kind of crucial date at which the Social Security Trust Fund starts to kind of run out of money. And that will be just as some Generation Xers start to retire. Right. The other thing that's going on is that an inheritance bonanza is coming as the baby boomers die off. But what's really going to happen is that money is going to be passed not to Generation X, but to millennials and Gen Z. So yeah. I'm afraid to say that the outlook for Generation X is not that good.
I'll try not to take it
I hear that.
Callum, thank you so much for talking to me.
No, that last point was the first time I heard that perspective of if a lot of boomers die and a lot of their inheritance going to millennials. Oh, yeah, that's interesting, I see, okay, there's some interesting points that are raised in this video. I'll be so curious to see what you guys have to say about that, because, I think from from my perspective, obviously I have Gen X parents, and I think a big part of what I hear in that world is when it comes to the world of retirement. I think the thing that's hitting a lot of Gen Xers is the whole retirement thing. Like, a lot of you guys probably thought you'd be retiring at like 60, around that age, but quite a few of you having to work longer into your 60s/70s to make it to afford to keep going, because you can't afford to come off right now, because I don't know, I guess when you were growing up, you were told that by the time you get to this age, this is when you're gonna retire, and then like all the schemes that are like activated around them ages. I don't exactly know how it works, I'll be honest. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit because I'm not thinking that far into the future yet, which I'm starting to now doing these videos. Like, I think it's good to understand a lot of these things, how they work at a young age. But long story short, yeah, I think that last point that he said about the wealth being passed on to millennials, and then how he talks about Gen Xers having it harder to buy a house. I don't know about that. To get on the ladder, no, Gen X having it harder than millennials did to get on the ladder. I don't know about that. You guys, I'm so curious to see what you guys have to say about this. Look, comment down in the comments below. If this point you guys are the rest of the rule, comment down a red heart, so I know my real ones are. Let's have a conversation, man. Inform me. Give me some perspective, guys. I'm curious. Like, if you've agreed, disagreed with what I said, what the video said, let me know. But of course, if you like this kind of videos, don't forget to like the video, especially if you made this far. That means you enjoyed the video. So don't forget to like before you head on. I know it's easy to forget. And of course, again, if you haven't joined already, join me on this journey, guys. I've been JayFlex, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.